stopped. How much harder is it to get up there and wriggle for 2 hours like you do? No, you're 45.
Well, in this sort of early days, you only used to play 20 minutes. So when you were like really young and agile, you only had to play, 20 minutes of music and that was it and you were off. Now it's like over 2 hours. So.
In 1962 and 1963 alone, the Beatles spent 473 days over those 2 years, or 65% of their time, playing live.
Quite frankly, this section must be the most ridiculous aspect of Mike Williams' entire presentation. Hold on, give me a moment, let me think. Yep, it's the most ridiculous. Let's take it slowly. The Beatles spent 473 days over those 2 years, or 65% of their time playing live. Notice anything? Can you see it yet? The Beatles spent 473 days playing live. So they were playing all day long then? While as ridiculous as that may sound, this is exactly what is happening here in Mike Williams' timeline. Mike Williams deducts a full 24 hours for each day that the Beatles had a live performance. For the most part, the Beatles had full days free with no other professional commitments at all before very short 20-minute performances, and full evenings free after their performances. Mike takes that full day, the entire 24 hours, and counts it as time now where the Beatles could not have written music. Thus, he creates enormous percentages in his pie charts and graphs. Up to 68% of a year is time where the Beatles could not have written any music at all, just because there was a performance on those particular days. It is pure subterfuge, sleight of hand, and out in the open trickery. Only someone with a clear intent to deceive could ever come up with this idea as a strategy. Of course, no actual, and I quote, Beatles researcher trying to ascertain how the band spent their time would ever deduct a full 24 hours, where, for the most part, the only commitment that day was a very short 20-minute gig. If Sherlock Holmes was asked to investigate a murder, he wouldn't conclude that, Sir Charles Baskerville takes his dog for a half-hour walk every evening, so therefore, every evening said dog is walked. That day does not count. That full day doesn't exist. That entire 24 hours is expunged from my investigations. Yes, it is that preposterous.
If we look at column 7, we can see the Beatles played live 226 out of 365 days out of the year in 1962, or 62% of the year.
But they weren't playing all day. 62%, or over half of 1962, is now counted as time where the Beatles couldn't have written music because they had a show that day. Let's take 1962. In 1962, the Beatles had 3 stints in Hamburg, amounting to around 6 weeks. All other shows were in Liverpool and the surrounding area. Sometimes they would just play between 1 and 2 hours at lunchtime in the Cavern Club. Just 1 or 2 hours. That full day, the full 24 hours, is counted by Mike now as time that the Beatles did not have. 24 hours are deducted by him as time where music could not be written. No lyrics jotted down, no chord progressions found, no melodies hit upon, no inspiration, no ideas, nothing. 24 hours gone, deducted. Sometimes they would only play for 1 hour or 2 in the evening. So again, just 2 hours out of a day that had no other commitments. Mike deducts the full 24 hours. Other times they would play lunch and evening for a total of 4 hours for both shows. Mike deducts the full 24 hours. Sometimes they might play a lunchtime show at the Cavern and then in the evening a 20-minute show elsewhere in Liverpool or the surrounding area. That full 24 hours is deducted by Mike. Quite often though, the Beatles were only playing for 20 minutes in the evening at other venues in Liverpool or locally just a few miles away. Just 20 minutes out of a full day with no other commitments. That full 24 hours is deducted by Mike as time that the Beatles did not have. No wonder then that the Beatles only had 38 days completely free in 1962. Most of their days and evenings were completely free. And so it continues for 1963.
Slice number 2 shows the Beatles spent 68% of their time in 1963, or 247 days out of the year, playing gigs.
This is completely ridiculous, of course. 68% of their total time was not spent playing live. The Beatles weren't playing all day and all night without a break for 247 days. They only played for 20 minutes to a maximum of half an hour on each of those days. Yes, there were rare occasions where the Beatles played 2 shows, and on very rare occasions 3 shows. But they had the entire day free prior to the shows, and complete evenings free after the shows. And even at 3 shows, this still only arrives at 1 hour out of the day. Let's look at slice number 2 on Mike's pie chart. All of this time, a complete 68% of the year, a complete 2/3 of the year is deducted by him as time that the Beatles did not have to write music. I told you it was ridiculous. The very opposite is in fact the truth. All of this time is potential time for songwriting. At this point, some people might be asking, but didn't the Beatles have TV and radio commitments on the same day as live performances? In 1962, there were none. In 1963, there were 18 occasions where a radio or TV appearance happened on the same day as a live performance. In 1964, there were 3 occasions. In 1965, just 1, and in 1966, there were none. Okay then. But didn't they have hundreds of press conferences and interviews? The following are yearly totals for press conferences and interviews, whether there was a live performance that day or not. In 1962, there was 1 radio interview. In 1963, 15 interviews. In 1964, 43 interviews. And in 65, 21 interviews. And in 1966, there were 19 interviews. We should also bear in mind that interviews in the 1960s were incredibly short. Very often it was a local reporter managing to grab a few minutes before they jump on stage. Or reporters managing to grab a sentence from each of them joking about their haircuts before boarding a flight. We have a 4-minute interview with John about his then recently published book. And as a quick side note, in Mike's entire 4.5-hour presentation, he mentions not even once, that John Lennon had 2 books of limericks, poems, short stories and his artwork published. A hobby that John entertained pupils and teachers with way back in primary school that led to him going to the Liverpool College of Art. And just a trifling inconsequential matter of more missing data. I digress. Even press conferences were extremely short by today's standards. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 13.5 minutes, 16 minutes, and the longest in duration appears to be around 25 minutes. Mike's chart shows 38 performances overseas for 1963. Mike states that his source is Wikipedia. However, the Wikipedia page that I checked with must be different, because when I looked at that page, they had 13 shows overseas. Intrigued, I double-checked with 2 other sources and indeed confirmed that it was 13 shows and not 38. All shows in 1963, save the 13, were played in the UK. Putting this into perspective, the length from one end of the UK to the other is just 841 miles and can be traversed by road in around 10 to 15 hours. And so this complete charade of Mike Williams continues, of course, for 1964.
Slice number 3 has the lads playing live and touring 47% of the time, or 173 days out of the year.
Just under half of that entire year is deducted by Mike as time where the Beatles could not have written any music whatsoever, just because a 20-minute performance fell on those days. And so this farce of a deception continues for 1965.
Slice number 3 has the Beatles touring 54 days out of the year, accounting for 15% of their time.
And so for 1965, Mike deducts a total of 54 days. 54 complete days free before a very short performance in the evening. Deducted. Gone. And finally, the pie chart for 1966. Despite the fact that Mike tells us that he wants to look at how the Beatles spent their time between 1962 and 1966, there isn't a pie chart for 1966, which is disappointing. Guess it was superfluous to needs, extraneous, beside the point, inconsequential, unnecessary, unrelated, pointless, inapplicable, who needs it anyway, immaterial and irrelevant. Okay, fair dues, Mike doesn't have a pie chart for that year, but does have the performances for 1966 on his very first chart. Again though, Mike's Wikipedia page must be different from the one that I looked at, cough, splutter, because Mike has 39 shows for 1966, while the Wikipedia page that I referenced has 32 shows. Anyway, in 1966, the Beatles played just 32 shows that year and had the complete month of June free before the US tour, and 3 months and 21 days completely free before recording Revolver. Or, more to the point, in the 8 months from January until September, they had 5.5 months completely free of any professional engagements. By deducting 24 hours for each time that the Beatles played live, Mike Williams has managed to deduct a full 2 years of potential songwriting time. Of course, no one, least of all a presenter, and I quote, Beatles researcher and a musician who has pulled together a team of researchers comprised of musicians, songwriters, etc., etc., would ever consider deducting a full 24 hours just because a live performance fell on that day. The idea is completely ludicrous and is grasping at straws, and as a method for discrediting, vilifying and attempting to ruin the reputation of a group of people is also scraping the barrel. The question remains though, how is it at all possible for a presenter to achieve this? How is it at all possible to deduct up to 68% of a year's total time that the Beatles did not have just because short performances fell on those days? How is it possible to present this and for it not to be noticed by the viewer? Because the best place to hide something is right out in the open. It's a classic case of hidden in plain sight. It's right there and so evident that we simply miss it. Mike exploits our trust in him.
Hey friends, it's Mike. 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 It's Mike. Hey friends, it's Mike. Hey friends, it's Mike. Hey friends, it's Mike. Hey friends, it's Mike.
We, the unwitting and trusting audience, are not expecting to be lied to be deceived. We're not expecting Mike Williams to be hiding anything in plain sight, so we miss the obvious. Just as we missed and overlooked Mike's massively extended recording times for albums, as pointed out in the first timeline video. In fact, Mike utilises the hidden in plain sight technique consistently throughout his presentation. It's why Mike Williams' presentation runs in at 4.5 hours, with 141 slides, graphs and charts. Many of these slides, graphs and charts are confusing, even blurred and almost illegible, and they are propped up with endless repetition, NLP and other hypnosis techniques. We, the audience, then are inundated, completely bombarded. We zone out, we lose focus. With so much going on, our brains inevitably suffer from spectacle fatigue. Our minds cannot register entirely everything being presented to us. So we overlook the obvious, we miss the details, we miss what is happening right in front of our very noses. This has been done by design. It's all trickery and deceit.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?